Hi, everyone. Welcome to 2026, to the first Social Change Career Podcast episode of the year. It's episode 6 in season 15. Today, we're going to be speaking with Juanita Lopez Pelaez about turning complexity into clarity, leading and working for impact. For people who may not have joined us for a live stream before, generally goes about an hour. We stream to LinkedIn and YouTube, and we deeply enjoy hearing from where people are watching from. So feel free to share a sentence or two about your background and put questions and comments throughout the episode. This will be converted to one of, I think we're at 200 episodes or just about by the end of the week. So please check out all the episodes at PCN Global/listen or in any major podcasting platform. And then 3 quick requests before we get started. Please follow Juanita on LinkedIn. Please follow PCDN and subscribe to our newsletters. And then whether it's for this podcast or any podcast, the number one thing you can do for podcasters is share and rate. It takes 30 seconds or 10 seconds, whether it's on Apple or Spotify or any platform. Sharing and rating just helps grow the audience and the impact. So Juanita is a regenerative leadership and systems change advisor, amazing title, with over 20 years of experience working across climate adaptation, sustainability, and organizational transformation. She has held senior roles in the public sector, including leading a $120 million US climate relocation project at Colombia's Fondo Adaptation, which helped over 1,000 families resettle into a climate resilient town. In the private sector, she helped consolidate the sustainability, ESG, and climate change consulting practice at KPMG Colombia in South America, leading work on climate finance, circular economy, and ESG reporting frameworks, including TCFD, TNFD, and SASB. We'll have to ask Juanita to decode the acronyms. She was also the co-founder of Mundo Común, a climate breakthrough funded initiative focused on cultural change through care and interdependence across Latin America. She holds a PhD in geography, a master's in comparative studies and development from the École de, even though I studied French for many years, I'm not going to try to pronounce it. So EHESS in France. I'm based in Medellin, Colombia. Juanita is based in Bogota today. So Juanita, thank you so much for taking time to share your wisdom, questions, and experience with us. And just to start off with, I mean, when you were thinking about your potential career paths, as I have an almost 15-year-old, so we start having conversations. He's an aspiring football player. I don't think he wants to go pro, but he loves math. He says he wants to be a deal maker. And who knows what he's going to be. But when you think back to your younger years, did you envision a career at this intersection of business and social impact and sustainability, or something else? And when did you first become aware there actually are career paths in this?
Okay, well, first of all, thanks, Craig, for this invitation. I'm so thrilled and happy to be here in your podcast. And thanks for that question. I was reflecting on it, and I think not really. I think I started from a question, and my question was very related to impact. Like social inequality and vulnerability was for me, I think, I was thinking since I was younger, I guess. And then I started studying geology because I became very interested in the view, the nature. I think I've always been, of nature. But when I started studying geology, I found out that what really interested me was human dynamics. So it kind of was this interesting on human dynamics from where I started. And I knew I wanted to have impact, and I knew I wanted to bring change, and very specifically in Colombia at the moment, I wanted to have incidence somehow. So I think public policy and impact was there, but when I was 20-year-old, it was a lot of thoughts. So it was in the row, I think. I started by the academics, but then I felt I did a doctorate, a PhD, and then when in France, which is very focused on, you do a PhD, then you end up working in the academy. But I was so clear I didn't want that. I wanted to come back to Colombia and to work in public sector, in public policy. And so that was my first, that's when I started. Then it changed, I think, along the way when I started to have new questions or new interests. I don't know if, yeah.
Yep, that's good. And so we have people joining us from around the world. And again, please feel free to let us know where you're watching from. Olan Maju, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but welcome from South Africa, who works in academia and research. And so just to go back to get a little more specific, so even thinking about undergrad, so did you major in geology? Did you major in geography? And just for people who may not remember, because my undergraduate studies were a long time ago. I mean, I took a geography class. I never took geology, but how would you do? Geology is more the natural resources and geography is more the human resources. How would you differentiate between the two?
Well, I think geology is very focused on like earth dynamics. And one thing that was like very, very like interesting, but at the same time, like was shocking for me. Well, not shocking. I don't know what the word in English would be. It's like when you speak geology, you speak like in 60 million year, like 250 million years. So it's kind of a scale that is out of totally reach of the human scale. And so, but yes, so geology is very focused on earth dynamics. I think I had the chance when I started studying geology, and I graduated in 2000, so that was also a long time ago. But I had the chance to have a teacher who was kind of my mentor, and he started speaking about climate change at that moment. He was a geologist, a very known geologist at the moment in Colombia, but he was very interested in human geology, like in human or anthropocentric dynamics. And so he was interested in climate change at the moment. So that's where I started. And I worked on disasters when I was at that was my bachelor's degree work was about disaster. And that's what brought me to geography. So geography is basically human and social dynamics put in territory. And there is more like physics geography, but I was in social geography, which is more about the dynamics or these crossroads between Earth and territory dynamics, but how the social interacts with that.
And when you think about geography and disasters, did you know? I mean, I graduated in '92, so I'm older than you. But if you think about when your professors started talking about climate change, or when you started working around disaster, did you know this was going to be a growth field? Because
No.
because it's kind of sad that now natural and human-made disasters are increasing. So when you started in working in disasters, how did you land your first consulting or positions? What kind of disasters did you work on, and what did you see as the role that you were trying to fulfill?
Well, I started working in disasters a lot because, well, that was a subject that was interesting for me because I come from Medellin, where you live. And Medellin is a city that is totally exposed to hydrometeorological disasters, which are those disasters that come from climate events somehow. But and it's been living a lot of those disasters every year. Every year there are 60, 70, sometimes 30, 40 people, many years dead. I mean, there's been disaster of 500 people dead. 2 years ago, there were like 200. So it's a city where natural, or they call natural disasters, are very present, and are very present specifically in the slums, or like in the informal areas of the city. So that was for me like an interesting, initially that was an interesting subject to study and to develop, which was this interaction between urban development, urban growing, and how these give place to build risks, And so for me, the most important part of studying disasters is like disasters are not natural. They come from a social and economic and power and structure, and how it relates to the territory we inhabit. And so I started working with hydrometeorological disasters because there were the disasters that occurred in Medellin. And those are the disasters that are like linked to climate change somehow, because as like rain, or the conditions of rain that are changing, those patterns are the ones that are changing. So I didn't think I was going to work on climate change. But when I finished a PhD, which was specifically on how were disaster risk built, like socially built in Medellin, and how were the representations about risk, what I wanted was to come back to Colombia and work on policies. And at that precise moment when I came back, which was in 2009, I started like working in Medellin in local policies. There was a huge disaster in Colombia. It was the La Nina phenomenon, 2010, and it was the most extensive disaster in Colombia, because it affected the whole economy and the whole infrastructure all around the country. So there were like towns that were flooded, and there was the 60% of educational infrastructure that was affected, and it was like 1,000 kilometers of roads that were affected. It was the whole economy of the country that was affected at the moment. And there was a new president at the time, and I think he had a visionary at the moment idea, which was, let's make the reconstruction of the country be an opportunity for adaptation to climate change. It was 2010. Nobody was really speaking that much about adaptation. We were more in the disaster risk management field. And so that organization was created and ended up there. Ended up for like many reasons of life. I wanted to be there, but also like kind of, I was invited to be part of that project. So for me, it was like that. It was like I wanted to work to have incidents. I wanted to work to have like specific impact, and this opportunity of working with the public sector in an adaptation, like large scale project of adaptation, was but for me, one of the most important schools. So that's where I started like more precisely like putting into practice what it meant to study, to be a geologist and a geographer, and also studied disaster risk.
Okay, amazing. And lots of questions are starting to come in. This is from Oluwajanro in South Africa. So maybe related to this position, can you share, so what does it mean to work on policy? He's asking for some applied examples. So, because you talk about the difference between disaster risk and reduction versus adaptation. So maybe first define the differences, because there's response. Like when it's like humanitarian relief, there's the response, but obviously these things are going to keep, Colombia has a lot of geological areas, a lot of rain and mountains, and just, there's landslides and flooding and rivers. And, like you said, I think last year in the north of the city next to Medellin and Bello, like an entire landslide came down and unfortunately killed a lot of people. So what does it mean to adapt versus to respond? And then can you provide some examples of how that works in practice?
Well, talking about policy, the first policy project I was involved in, it was when I came back. Colombia was reviewing the law. There was a law in Colombia that was the disaster risk management law. And at the moment, it was really focused on response, and like, there's always been a little bit like that. There's a lot of investment in response, and there is very little investment in what we call prevention. But the main thing is like the system was designed for response. So I was part of the team that developed and proposed a new disaster risk management law that became a law, that was enforced as law. And the main change of that law was that the focus was not anymore the disaster itself and the response, but was risk, and how was risk built. Like at the end, when you have a disaster, there's been a series of dynamics and processes around that give place to they like give place to risk. And then so the whole policy system was not anymore about response, but about how were risks built and how we could reduce the building of risks. And so that was the disaster risk management approach. But I think totally applies to what we are talking about adaptation now, because we know climate change is meant is an anthropocent is an anthrop and how do you say that in English? That's
It's a hard
anthropocene.
word.
It's but it's sort of anthropocenic. I don't know how to say.
Anthropocene, I
Thank
think.
And so we know there is the impact of men, I mean, of dynamics, of human dynamics that bring climate change about. It's also a human construct, climate change. And I think this idea of we being able to have agents around climate change because we know how it is built, we know how to respond to those conditions that if placed to it. It's where adaptations come up. You know, there are some things that maybe won't change, but adaptation is a way of thinking about how risks are built and how we can reduce vulnerabilities around risks and how we can reduce exposure and how we can also change our mindset so we are able to find opportunity in those changes that are already there and that may not, be reversed. And so that's, I think at this moment this whole policy system has been revised in terms of how we understand that risk management and adaptation are really linked topics and are all centered in how we make decisions. And I think that's the main part, how we design our system and make decisions so those decisions don't build risk.
And then can you provide some examples? That's a really good kind of, let's say, policy differential, or at least exploring how it's approached complementarily or differently. But can you give some examples, whether it's the law that was passed, on adaptation? So what does that, whether it's the city level or town level or country level, what does that mean in practice? Is a certain percent of budget goes to, looking at this? Is that when towns or cities are doing their, let's say multi-year plans and development, they're factoring this into every decision? That they hire staff? Like what are some examples of how this works in practice?
I want to work on the example of the Fondo Adaptación and what was the different this organization wanted to bring about is that the way we design infrastructure in general is based on the information we have. And that information, and particularly in Colombia, is very limited. Globally, the information about climate is limited because we have very, very, very small spans of time regarding the whole system. But in general, we make decisions based on those, on that data. And so one example is how we change design criteria, like in the terms of reference for designing a road or a house. So we are able to make that road more resilient to climate. And in engineering terms is, I don't know, you have, the roads have these box culvert where water pass through from the mountain. So now you need to have them bigger because you're going to have bigger floods of, bigger escorrentía or water coming from the mountains, to make an example. But also you need to give place to the river, So in many cities or places, rivers were totally encased into channels. And now we know that rivers need the dynamics because river dynamics are the ones that are able to kind of be the natural protection towards flooding. So how do you give space to the river? But that means resettlement of people that are around the river. That means a different way of seeing dikes, for example, just to put another example, or building schools, let's say. So there are schools that are exposed to are in mountains or are exposed to rivers. Also, how do you design those schools, whether higher so they don't get affected by the river, or with a different engineering standards, so they are more firm and less, or more resilient, or less, or more resistant to landslides. I don't know if those are the kind of examples in technical. But there are also a lot of that have to do, of course, with ordering the territory. Where do you build and where you should not build, or what kind of infrastructure you should build? where the cities should grow to and where not to grow to, if that makes sense.
So I think I lost you for 1 second. Let's wait. Let's see. Make sure the connection's good. Give me 1 second for everybody, because somehow, hopefully, can you hear me, Juliana? Juanita?
I do.
Okay.
But I listen. You are kind of cut.
Okay. Let me just check. My internet should be fine. I'll edit this out. I'm going to refresh for 1 second and come back in and help.
I lost Craig.
Sorry about that. That was very
Okay.
usually amazing. I'll edit this out in the audio episode. So I actually went to a hotspot. I have no idea why our
I
internet
was
timed out.
It's okay. That gave me time to kind of reflecting on different things and example.
Okay, no, but I apologized. Anyways, this will be edited out in the audio version. It happens, but usually much more often when people are in rural regions. So a question here. So one thing is, when you think about adaptation, can you also talk, how does that make a difference both in terms of the budget allocation? So one is it's a mind frame or an analytical lens about any kind of building or policy decision. But two is like, does it mean budgets are allocated differently, or so from a public policy perspective around adaptation?
Totally. Budgets are allocated with a view of a long-term view, and also adapted to uncertainty, and are adjusted to, and that's ideally because I live in a country where long-term, I think, well, everywhere but here, it's like long-term policy is it's like very political, so it's hard to think long-term and to in continuity, but I think it has a lot of to do with that. It's the mindset for making decisions, and the mindset is not the immediate result, but the long term, or the long view vision result. And it has to do with how you design. It has to do with the kind of skills you need. It has to do also with the mindset, of decision making at every level, because it's not only the technical level, but you also need the policy maker or the decision maker that is able to to take the risk of making decisions that are long term, or that sometimes are not necessarily popular, or not necessarily bring immediate reward.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about, in terms of the climate adaptation project you worked on around 2010? So the scale of that, and then what was the goal of the project? What were the challenges? And did it actually involve moving people from multiple locations to a more, let's say, more safe location, or was it adapting their existing locations? And just how, just the complexity of putting this all together and the challenges.
Well, I was involved in different projects, but one example, or one very important and landmark of that, was Gramalote. This is a small 1,000 families town in Colombia, which is a small town. Yeah, like 5,000 people. It's like a really, really, really small municipality. Bogota has 8 million. But it was a town that was totally destroyed by a landslide during La Nina phenomena, and so the town totally needed to be relocated, and people couldn't no longer live there. The church was totally like broken down and resquebrajada. And so there was this promise also from the government that a new town was going to be built, and for those families. So the challenge was to design a project, a resettlement project that was not only an infrastructure project, like a new town, as if you build, an organization, but that you restore the livelihood and the economic and social fabric for those people to have a new place to live. And so, well, there were challenges at many levels. I think there were technical challenges related to where to build the town, like where were the right geological conditions for building the town, and what were the right territorial ordering, how do you say that, like instructions for the plan de ordenamiento territorial to put
like
the things where they needed to
the
be.
right legal structures. Yeah.
Yeah, so there were all the technical, but I think the most challenging was how to being able to develop these from like a local based or perspective, or at least like a collective building, when knowing that it was a public, like a national government project, and there are a lot of hierarchies there. When there
Hierarchies,
is
yeah.
the hierarchies, there is a national that comes down to local. But I think the main challenge was where did people feel involved and part of that project, so they were going to be able to really embrace it as their new town, and to come back, because I think the challenge was the town took 5 years to be built, around 5, 6, 7 years to be built. Those people were already somewhere else, living in the city, having families, like children were now, grown up. So there was this challenge of were we going to be able to build the right conditions, so people were attracted to come back. And for me, that was a big challenge, and it took a lot of social work. It took a lot of participatory developing, of building, a lot of negotiations, a lot of trade-offs, and a lot of different scales of governance. So decision making, took place at different levels, and how all those levels were combined also. And I think the one of and that is a very important limitation, or at least restriction, when you are in the public, is that you have limited resources, limited time, a lot of decisions to be made that have impact in a lot of people. So it's like you do what is the best you think you can do when you're doing it, kind of, because there is always this could be this or that, but you made decisions at the moment with the resources, the restrictions, and the information you have. And I think that's one of the challenges of being there.
Okay, wonderful. And welcome Renee from Cameroon and Mark from Serbia and lots of other places. So, and again, apologies for the outage earlier. So a question comes in from Mark, who's based in Serbia, but his question is, most of us work in complex environments, including he recently was working in Ukraine. Starting internally clear communications and a shared vision that is frequently revisited has helped him and the teams to stay on target. Being flexible is critical, but making sure everyone understands what's happening and why. What are some ways that you've managed both this internal team dynamics to manage complexity? So whether it's at KPMG in your own organization, but because you're talking about systems approaches, or multiple stakeholders engaging in complex problems, and you are kind of a systems wizard, or not, maybe wizard is not the right term, but you're a systems convener. So what are some of your reflections, first in general, when maybe it's not a crisis environment, and then also if you're working and trying to respond to some kind of crisis, how this needs to be adapted.
I was thinking on reflection and like system change. For me, I think the most like enlightening, and it was not at the moment, but now I kind of understand. It's when I was able to emotionally involve. I started very technical. I was a PhD and came with all this, very at my 30s formation, and I have like, all by the book things to do. And then, well, specifically in Gramalote, I had these people were dealing with loss. They were dealing with not having the town anymore, and with el duelo, like, how you say duelo again?
The pain.
Pain.
The pain or the grief.
Another word.
Or grief.
Grief, great pain. And so, and I had a loss at that. I mean, so I was, very technical. Things are like this, and I think for me, one of the most important learnings was once I had a very deep and profound loss in my life, and that loss allowed me to connect with my emotion, and by connecting with my emotion and understanding what was going inside me, allowed me to better connect into what was going inside the people I was working with. And I think I was better at being at service of what they were expecting and needed, and being more empathizing. I was able to empathize more with that. And I think that's the key. I mean, like, for system change in general, is how you are able to be in your own transformation path that allows you to connect from within, from inside, into what's going on and how you can be at service. And I think it's been more profound in different moments of my life, and it's kind of been transforming. But at this moment of life, I think that's for me one of the most important kind of learnings I've had. And yeah, and it's something to cultivate all the time, because you go from from rationality to come back to emotion. But I think being very aware of where you are emotionally allows you to better connect to the problem you're solving, and to the system, to the change of the systems that need to be changed.
Okay. Welcome, Ahmed from Egypt. Feel free to share your questions and comments. So a follow-up question, and then also going back to Mark's. Let me start with Mark's question again. So if you think about like the team dynamic, so one is, being, and I have the same thing, like I have a PhD, and it's an amazing learning journey. And I think it helps me to ask better questions, but I don't, so better questions maybe, sometimes do practice better, but it doesn't, but often the greatest wisdom comes from people managing and dealing with their own challenges, and maybe they just need an outside perspective or so. So one is, first Mark's question. So when you're thinking about team management, again, whether it's at KPMG, in Mundo Común, or in, consulting or advising work, what have you seen that helps create the healthiest teams, or at least, let's say teams that can be adaptive and responsive, whether it's around marketing or social impact or finance, so as, Mark was talking about clear communication, you're talking about, not being too intellectual and being, I did have someone, I've done, done a lot of research. I had someone say this to me many years ago. I won't go into all the details, but someone high up at USAID, which no longer exists, unfortunately. And he said, I don't like to hire too many people with advanced degrees in a particular discipline. I won't say which one, because he said they come filled with all these theories and they don't understand. Often it's the choice of the least worst option rather than the perfect option. So, so I guess training is amazing, but often there's a gap between the training and the practice. So, but thinking about teams, what have you learned about bringing together cross-stakeholder teams, whether you're managing them or consulting?
I think there's like combination of excellence, of course, like how do you like being have very clear like target of why we're doing this, like what is the impact we want to bring about, and what's the best we can do, with a lot of flexibility too. And I think for teams is a lot of flexibility around decisions, about knowing that there are changes all the time, like how to adapt to those changes outside, but also in the team. I think empathy has a lot to do to what I was speaking, but I think I've learned that the teams where I've have been more like thrilled and to work on is where like real relations are built, like where you are able to build strong relations that are based on affection, that are based on empathy, that of course are based on being able to deal with difference at stressful points. At a consultancy firm as KPMG, there is a lot of pressure all the time. And so how do you like keep excellence with empathy and flexibility, and I think also trust. And for me, trust is like to build trust, and to build trust is it's built every day, kind of, and in what you put on, and how you're able to transform, to delegate to. For me is a lot about how do you, like, people is empowered to understand everyone plays a role, and everyone is capable to do what is best at that role, and like work as a system in that place. So I think that those are things that come to my mind. Thinking on specifically, I think where I was more like, because at the adaptation in the public, building teams is it's different. You work with contractors, but at KPMG, that was like building a team that started really small and started to grow. It was a lot about about engagement around what make us come here every day. Like, what is our motivation? What's what we want to change, but beyond the KPIs and whatever you come to work for, and the role and whatever. But it's a lot of that is disconnected to the changes you want to bring into life.
Let's take a step back to, we didn't really talk about your master's PhD. And our podcast, we have people from around the world. The average age tends to be, let's say, 32 to 40, but we have all different ages. So can you talk a little bit about choosing to do your postgraduate training in France, how you chose that? Any advice for people, let's say that was a little while ago. So any advice for people who are thinking about advanced training, whether it's master's or PhD versus professional training, and if they are going to pick a graduate program, how to pick, like how you went about picking the right one for you?
Okay. Well, many of the decisions are not like strategic decisions. So for me, I loved France, I loved French, and I had lived in France before, but I've never lived in Paris, and I wanted to live there. So it was like that. And then when, of course, I knew someone that was doing something interesting that I could connect with what was doing, but I think the main motivation was I wanted to go, abroad. I loved French and I wanted to live in Paris. And then there was this program, which was really interesting because it was multidisciplinary and allowed me to bring, this, like, to combine a very natural science background to social, which was what I want.
Yep. But any advice?
So yeah, it's like, sorry.
But as a manager of people too, and just thinking about where impact work is going for people who, I've taught in Paris twice. I love Paris. I lived in Europe many years. I never got to spend more than a month in Paris, but it's one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And if you think about, this is not disaster reduction, but if you think about the urban ecosystem, the change, I was in Paris the first time in 91, but then the change that Paris has undergone the last 5 years under Mayor, I think, Anne Hidalgo, in terms of putting people and urban, let's say, friendliness in terms of biking and parks, it's amazing. Because I taught there, I think, in 2018 and 2022, and to see the change in urban design in those 4 years was just mind blowing. And obviously, but can you talk as a manager, or even as a mentor, if someone asked you, what is your perspective on upskilling in general? and grad school or work at a startup or volunteer in an NGO? Or a related question, what do you see as the skills that are going to be most critical in working in adaptation or ESG or climate?
I think it's a strange one. I know academic background. It's in a lot of turmoil, let's say. But I think it gives you a structure, and it gives you like questions, and it gives you a capability of making right questions. So I think that is important from a background point of view. From people I've worked with and what I've seen, I think it now with AI is so changing now. It's like, but I think it's a combination. I think it's very necessary to have a strong background and like a strong structure. I think structure is the most important. And structure for me is, are you able to write, and are you able to think? Like to like articulate what you think into something you can write or communicate. So that's one part. I think communication is key, and I think we are very low trained in general in communicating. So I think storytelling and everything that is related to how you not only know but are able to communicate what you know or want to bring is it's totally relevant at this point and in this moment. So I think in storytelling there is a lot and communication skills in general. There is a lot of work to do. I think soft skills, and that soft skills is something that is not necessarily learned in somewhere. I think soft skills are acquired, and are acquired a lot of because of the background, but practice brings a lot of soft skills. So being exposed to real projects, to working with communities or in different contexts, in different, I think the most for me is not like, it's a combination between skills and like soft and hard skills and practice. And in practice it's also a combination, I would say, of environments, different perspectives of work. Yeah, I would say I don't have a formula for that. That's my path also, but I think there is a lot of combinations there.
So for thinking about consulting world, because a lot of people aspire to work in consulting, whether it's KPMG or Dahlberg Advisors or Bridgespan, or I have lots of alum and clients who either come from the consulting world or have been there and want to move out. So can you talk a little bit, like, how did you get into the consulting, the KPMG world, and then like for people, what were some of the most exciting things you got to work on? Because in terms of, were you helping corporations integrate ESG? Were you working on internal kind of team development? So what was, obviously you can't give away specifics, but kind of what was some of the most exciting things, and what are some challenging things, not necessarily for KPMG, but just for people who work in consulting? What do you see are some of the common challenges?
Okay, so to the first question, how did I come to be there?
How did you get? Yeah.
I got there because when I ended working in the public sector, I wanted to work at the corporate sector a lot, and I wanted to know how was the private sector inside. And I felt there is the private sector. It has a huge capability of impact at many levels. So I wanted to be there, and there was this opportunity, but they were looking for someone at this particular moment. ESG and firms like KPMG and firms like that were like really small practice, and a practice really oriented to sustainability reporting and compliance. And so they were looking for someone who would be able to bring a background on policy making and like to work with the public sector in projects that were more complex. So I think that was the background that at the moment they evaluated as important for what they were looking for. And then I arrived at KPMG at a moment. I started in 2017. It was like I was like in the right moment where ESG totally peaked. It was like I started speaking it was a really small team that were totally like, these are the the environmental people here, very small, and they were doing reporting, to this is the topic we need to speak all around the firm. This is the trend, So it was a very exciting moment, because it was a moment that was exciting, for full of new possibilities to work on, and full of new topics. There was a net zero, there was TCFD, the market was totally changing. There were new reporting requests that were not voluntary, that were becoming mandatory for many markets. So the market started to ask for it, and there was also this transformation in many organizations, not only KPMG, but in general, there was this transformation. And so for me, the most very exciting part was leaving this reporting part and starting working with policies. And at the moment, we were, for example, there was this analysis for the financial flows that flew to climate change and adaptation. So understanding where the money was coming, where were the kind of investments that were flowing to different projects. It was taxonomy, so starting working with taxonomy. There was these TCFD was for me one of, when I arrived, and I was like, TCFD is the Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosures. This was the first framework where companies starting speaking not only in the risk they were bringing to by emissions, but how climate would be a risk, but also an opportunity for business. And that totally changed the conversation. And I came from the risk, background. And so I was like, this is a topic I can be very present. And so I was very, very new, one of the first with KPMG who started speaking about TCFD here and then in the region. So that change on climate be seen as an opportunity, and being able to speak about risk, what it meant the transition for business, what it meant also being exposed to different physical risks, and what were the opportunities that were there, was totally changed the conversation. I was in that moment. And so I started speaking with different sectors. It was the oil and gas sector. It was the infrastructure sector. It was the agriculture sector. It was the financial and the banking sector. For me, one of the most important projects was helping the insurance sector in Colombia, and developing capabilities for the insurance sector to understand what it meant to speak about climate change, or for the financial sector too.
Sorry, I just want to interrupt, because obviously the Zurich Insurance out of Switzerland does some of the most interesting reporting on climate risks and how that's going to impact the insurance industry. And obviously nothing client specific, but can you talk about in general, what does it mean, for an insurance company, whether they're providing, whatever they're insuring, whether it's, cargo transport or infrastructure, what does that mean in practice, to think about either the risk or the opportunity?
This was okay. For me,
you can pick another sector, but that would be insurance. But just something
that was a good one, because for the insurance sector, one of the main examples was there was this Harvey hurricane in that affected Texas in 2017, I think it was. So it's like the enchainment, como encadenamiento.
Yeah, the connections or the linkages.
But the connection, but how connection is linked and in a chain, enchained.
Yeah.
From the occupation of a place. So you provide insurance for buildings that don't have enough studies that approve that kind of give information about how exposed those buildings are.
Yeah.
That's and risks are changing with climate. So those territories or places in the city that are developed and built now are exposed to risks that were not foreseen,
calculated before. Yeah.
So there is a lot that has a lot to do to ordering in the city, and there's a whole change there. the immobiliar,
Real
the
estate. Real
real
estate.
estate sector was one of the most affected sectors, or where more opportunities were too. What were the new kind of insurance you should develop for you're seeing all around. I mean,
Right.
even because Colombia is exposed in, let's say, vulnerable or informal settlements, but you're seeing like high wealth developments all around the world that are affected by climate change, and that totally affect the insurance sector. So it was a lot about understanding how new risks were shaped, what was the new information that was needed, and what were the lack of information to understand that, and how to bring that information, how to design new products that could deal with that new uncertainty or the new like assessments of risks that were.
Yep.
And
Just
in
like,
that, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, no, in that
Okay, I'll
process
just
was
say like,
about.
I'm muting myself. Keep going.
No, I was going to say that for that in that the project that I can think of was precisely with insurance agremiation, like the insurance. ¿Cómo es que se dice agremiación?
Like mergers or like the industry, like the agremiación.
Oh, it's like the corp that kind of hold all the companies.
Yeah, like the holding company,
No,
I
no es the
think.
holding
No,
company.
lo
No, es
siento para
la.
mi español.
No, es el sector, es la agremiación industrial, like the industry association, industry
Yeah, the trade is, yeah, the industry
trade.
association.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was like as an industry where the new talents and skills should be developed. That was one of the like what new information and new skills needed to be developed in the industry.
So I'm just going to tell one quick story, and then I'm going to ask. It could be a challenging question, and again, if people have other questions, feel free to bring them in or let us. So just an example, my parents live in Sarasota. They're getting super elderly, and they moved to, partially for health reasons, but they moved to independent living because the place they were living was beautiful, but it wasn't built for hurricanes, and they had to evacuate multiple times. A small condo, and it was just too stressful. And I have another friend in Florida who pays more for her insurance than her mortgage. Like there's really practical implications for this. So a question that, because we've talked about risk, but there's also opportunity. And so when you think about careers, the risk end is, kind of calculating, whether it's public sector or private sector, it's calculating what are some negative impacts or potential negative impacts that could happen from something. But the opportunity, it could be a financial opportunity. It could be making quality of life better. It could be, building new products, helping communities be more resilient. And when you think about careers, whether it's your own career or advising others, do you see any difference between working on the risk mitigation versus work, because one is almost like preventing, and the other one's more like the opportunity of what could be created. So how do you see that in terms of like career opportunities or where things are going in general, or your own work?
Well, you know what? Because you brought me like the whole story of my journey. But I think I'm more and more. I think less and less about risk, and I'm thinking more and more about regeneration. And by regeneration, I mean like because risk based thought is a lot is a lot of what anything that can happen, you know. But that anything that can happen, I'm not going to be like in the very technical ground, but it's based on what we know, as like on the past we know, or the whatever that we know. But when I think about opportunities, a lot about how do we change the way we relate to the world, I mean the planet we live in, and also see an opportunity in that change, knowing that that change not totally questions the idea we have of what means development, of what means success, of what means abundance, of what means, everything that, like, all the principles we've based our system on, that gives place to the risks we're seeing and the like disasters we're seeing, need to be transformed. It's not enough anymore to deal with risk, now we need to think about how everything we do kind of sustain life in many ways. And so for me it's a total change of perspective, and that perspective has to a lot of do with well-being, but we need to rethink what well-being mean, because yeah, well-being, it's not anymore accumulation of only profit. For example, well-being is how the system as a whole kind of keep vitality in at many different levels, personal, but also at the city level, at the like country level, at local level.
So amazing. And what is, I mean, so I'm just thinking of Medellin, our city, or, so Medellin has so many challenges, just like everywhere in the world, but they're also doing a fair number of things right. And I'm just thinking on a very practical level, like one of the nice things is there's public exercise, like one, because of the weather, you can walk, and the biking is not as good as Bogota, but there's exercise parks everywhere, or they're building more and more soccer courts, which are not closed and just for elite people. So part of it is like, how do you create space for people to be together and be well? So that's one thing. But when you think about at a larger level, because Colombia is one of the most unequal societies in the world, I mean, when you think, like, I'm just wondering, when I agree, we need a fundamental change. How do you, like, what are some examples where you see that maybe happening, or where you are hoping to help a little bit where it might go in your work, or what is inspiring you that's showing kind of systems level change?
You mentioned Paris. Well, this last year I took a sabbatical, and the whole last year, and part of it I lived in Paris, and I was totally like, it blew my mind too, because I lived in a Paris 10 years ago that was totally different, and it was a hard city to live in. And I was amazed by how it was kind of turned into like the things that sustain life. So you mentioned places to kind of gather, but it was also the water, the river. I mean, now you can like swim in the Seine, it's like, really, in a like one of the so and there was also the change in vegetation. So now you have nature all around, and parts that were totally built with concrete are being destroyed and replaced by natural forest, but not the normal ones where you see very structured plantations, but kind of native plantations that like where soil regenerates. And there was this biking part, so now I was amazed that now you could do all around biking, and people were outside, more places to be. I think you mentioned Medellin. I think is the city where a lot of transformations has taken place very positively, like going towards that idea of the city being a place for life, like how you make cities a way of life. And that's a combination of relational, like relating differently to other, to having places to kind of also like develop collective agency, understanding commons. For me, one of the biggest challenges of the cities, and I live in Bogota, is like, and it's at city level, but a global level, is that we are not conscious of commons. As we are part of it, we are nature, we are those commons. The water we see, or we drink, we swim on, is us. And so how cities are places that where life kind of thrive in many ways. And so I've seen that amazed me in Paris. I think has a lot to do with places for like relating, for creating community. I think the community part and like the social fabric around it is totally important, and how cities like bring spaces for that. And I think it has to do to build a new relation with nature, because we are like totally separated. So we are like in blocks of concrete with kind of spots of nature, but it's like how we make nature part of like everyday lives. Now, I saw today, there was a project in Bogota around listening biodiversity and the sounds of birds in the city, so people start to be able to kind of recognize and identify more and more with the sounds of biodiversity in the city, in an 8 million people city in Bogota. So there is a lot to do with how we build a new relation with, like, yeah, environment is a word, but like with nature, with us being part of it.
Can you go about 10 more minutes? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So just we have a beautiful terrace in Medellin, and we get a lot of birds. And we have a cat who always wants to attack the birds, but it's amazing. I always forget, what's the one, Guayacal? There's one Colombian bird that is so loud. But I mean, Colombia is the second most biodiverse country on the planet, and it's like amazing.
Some mornings, Guacharaca?
Yeah. The ones that are just sound, yeah. But it's amazing, especially on weekends when there's not a lot of noise. You just hear it's incredible. So a little bit. So one thing is you were fortunate to take a sabbatical, and can you talk a little bit about, for anyone who has the ability to take some time off, because obviously, people have to think about life and balance and finances, like any insights, like how to make a sabbatical particularly useful, and like what you found the most enjoyable about it?
Well, for me, at this point, I would say, don't try to make your sabbatical useful. it's like kind of, and I think that's a change. At the beginning, when I started my sabbatical, I have like KPIs, and I wanted you have, so I'm gonna do this and this and this, and we took it in family. So and we took my son out of a school, but I wanted to, at the beginning, like maybe he takes some homeschooling, and we have some schedules for. And then it became totally nothing of that. It became totally organic, with no agenda, with no structure, with no, it was like, this is it. Like, live the life as it is every day, and I kind of enjoy it. That was it. And for me at the beginning was like, I was not used to doing nothing, nothing in the terms of, I just walk around, or I have no mails to answer, I have no chats to, nobody's asking me nothing. So I'm like, nobody's waiting for me or expecting for me to write, or, and that freedom, that idea of just being and like enjoy with every, part of life that is, breakfast, or, enjoying this bread, like life. So for me, it was a lot about, like, and not that I didn't have a life that I had, but I was not that conscious, I think, of the present moment, and the moment I was living, and how to enjoy it without all the, identification of who I am, what I do, and my role. And also, I think, not having a structure, we talk a lot about with kids, with kids. I think one of the problems of kids is like you want kids to have classes and, extracurriculars all the time. And everybody says, let kids play, just, or get bored or whatever, do nothing. And that's I think that's a gift, and that's a gift that is so important. So for me, it was a lot about that. Then I started to feel that I wanted to explore this and that. So it was also a moment to explore new things, and to see myself in different, doing different things, more creative, more like writing, more artistic, like painting, more, having a space for other aspects of life. I didn't have time to give a space to, kind of. so it's like making time for like different information to come up, and information that come from so many places that is not necessarily, structured information.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yes. I used to work 2 full-time jobs, so now I just work one job and a little consulting. So I have a lot more time to just be, which is amazing, because my wife is like, you're going to have a heart attack. And it's just being able to take 3 hours off and play pickleball or go for whatever it is, like, but obviously it's a privilege, not everyone. So can you talk a little bit about how you've been learning about regeneration, and, what kind of work you're doing now, or consulting work, or where you see yourself, where you are, or where you see yourself going, and, what type of engagements people might consult with you for?
I think I started getting closer to regeneration with Mundo Común, this initiative after KPMG. I started an initiative as that wasn't starting at the moment. It was like um, its birth, and it was an initiative about care for climate agents of change. It's like I've always started by women who were activists in environment, but that kind of enlarged to how do we put care at the center of everything we do and the way we relate to the work we do, starting by our own selves and starting by understanding that we are the first territory of change for any change we want to bring, and if we want to bring systemic change. So Mundo Común was a lot about how we like cultivate a movement of around care and interdependence for the climate movement. And so that was like the first approach. And I was there for 2 years, so kind of developing a lot about the the conceptual work that is behind that, but that also allowed me to be close to many initiatives that are going on and to many like movements around regeneration that are coming about. So, and I think also for me the most important is how that kind of has passed through me, so how that regeneration has taken place in my own path and journey. So that was a part that was very human and like human development centered. Um, and now I think my questions is how to bring that into more like mainstream spaces. Like how do we bring regenerative transitions not only at the like at every scale of transition that starts from our own selves, but also the world is transitioning to a new emerging place we want to get to. So how do we bring this idea of having regenerative transitions in organizations, in what like with people in teams at different scales, and how also through the way I orchestrate projects, for example, or initiatives, I'm able to bring those regenerative practices into practice, and into practice it means little gestures when you are working in teams, or little gestures when you think or design projects. And so for me it's been interesting to I did the U Lab. That's like theory U Lab with Otto Scharmer theory. It's an MIT, very recommended. I have seen a lot of that, and also through the things I've been reading, but I've kind of following a lot the regenerative movement at many levels. There are city regenerative movement. There is a lot about regenerative leadership, which is the thing I think I'm the most interested on now. And yeah, I think that's kind of where what I've seen, and I see a lot of opportunities because at the sustainability and ESG discussion, I think we need to kind of go beyond speak business language, speak the business language so we are able to speak risk and a profit so we are able to be understood. And so, but I think it's not anymore about KPIs. I mean, I think, or reporting. I really think, and it's no longer about, yes, we have the buy-in from directives or board, etc. I think it's a lot about how we redesign the idea we have of prosperity, and how do we bring this design into every process at the corporate level in a way that kind of it's life centered and that has many scales. But for me, that's also where I think the field is going, and where there is a lot of opportunities, and where there is a lot of space for people to really like bring on these changes that are needed.
So just one or two more questions and we'll wrap up. So one is for people who want to, I teach on investing, and I mean, just a comment. So I teach on investing, and, Georgetown used to teach on it. And, my conclusion is that 90% of public companies that are strong in ESG, they're crap. I'm not saying like all of them. I'm not saying they're not good in one area, but when you look at it from a holistic perspective, maybe they're saving energy, but their product is still fundamentally destroying the planet, or their supply chains, or their employee. There's very few publicly traded companies that I think are truly even sustainable, let alone regenerative. I think private sector, like some privately held companies maybe. But a question. So okay, I'll skip the big question, but a practical question for people who want to go beyond, let's say, checking off the boxes. What are some career paths that you see emerging, or any advice? Like, again, is it better to, because you've worked across sectors, so is it better to work for a startup, or go into a large corporation, or get expertise in finance? I mean, obviously each person needs to decide for themselves, but any advice for people who are like want to go beyond checking boxes to making change? And where do you see the most exciting opportunities?
I think there's opportunity for change everywhere, but I mean, the public, for me, the public is a place where the scale of impact is a scale you maybe cannot get to understand anywhere else. The possibilities of impact. So for me, the public, and I think is needed there is need of people working everywhere that has this chip on. I think the most important is how we, like, from this new mindset. I think there are a lot of opportunities in the philanthropic sector, and specifically now where like all funding and financial is kind of totally messed up. There is a lot for the opportunities, but and I think a lot about, we need to think new. It sounds like, of course we need to think different, but it's a lot about, we have no idea, so we need a space for experimentation, for seeing if things work or not, which is a lot about too when you mention emprendimientos. I lost the word.
Entrepreneurship
Entrepreneurship or business development. There is a lot of need there too, experimentation. What I would say for those new businesses is like, and I've seen it a lot, and I think I've seen for startups, it's like, let's start now and then we think impact, impact come later. And impact is not, let's have environment or ESG. It's like, really, how do you bring impact into bringing a new world into whatever you're doing? So it doesn't matter where you are. And I think there's need of people everywhere. And I see a lot of opportunities in regeneration, in climate adaptation, totally. And not only climate, it's like in adaptation as a mindset for the way we invest in general. Mm-hmm. I see a lot of possibilities and a field of work in nature finance, and like in bringing nature into the conversation, but also make finance intelligent for nature. Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of opportunities in I was thinking in AI and regeneration, because I think there's this movement of AI, is how AI at the same time brings the challenge of being trapped in the same system. So how do we use AI to reimagine the future and the system, like to bring a new imagination? So I think there's also a lot of things to explore there.
Okay. So the last two questions, one is just, what sources do you find most inspiring around regeneration or well-being? Like any podcasts, newsletters, books, like, just things that you go to regularly, because the world is a mess, not everything, but it's a pretty harsh time for a lot of people. And so where do you go to find, not necessarily overly optimistic, but at least interesting, different perspectives?
I'm really interested now. I like deep ecology, like everything related, like Plum Village, Thich Nhat Hanh, and all that. I love Robin Wall Kimmerer. I've been reading her a lot, and I love her. I don't know, but like she's got es que está en español, Hierba Sagrada, but I had them.
Okay. Sweet, yeah, I have it in English. I forgot the name, but yeah.
The name is in English is Breeding Sweetgrass.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And there is a new one I started to read that is Gathering Moss. And it's like, you can like learn from nature. Biomimicry is something I've been reading a lot too. There is all this new like literature about what regenerative economic means. So, but I also I'm really interested now in neuroscience everything that is related to the quantum field, like what it means to be out of this like limited space of mind and rationality, and like be more connected to all that is there that we just don't know. This idea of there is all this field of information that we cannot even dimension. So I've been about that too. I love literature. I think LinkedIn is a nice place to like follow people and see. I find a lot of movements that are there, and so I find LinkedIn as a place where I kind of bring me to other place where I kind of get to know where discussions are going on now. Yeah, I would say that
Okay.
that comes to my mind.
And then the last question: best channel to follow you on? So is it LinkedIn or like
It's
or
just
just kind
LinkedIn. I'm bringing
of
my website, but for now it's LinkedIn.
okay? And then anything
And
you
I'll
want
be
to say?
happy to connect.
Anything you want to say before we finish? Anything else?
No, I think we've said thanks a lot. I like these conversational reflections about the journey. I think this is a moment of life where we're reflecting about the journey, but not only the journey, but like kind of like bringing more like conscious onto how is the way I can bring impact to, and what really connect me. It's been a journey too. So it's nice to speak about it in this moment. You brought me a lot about the past. So nice to
Okay.
be with stories.
So
Thanks a
thank
lot.
you so much, Juanita. We went over time, but thank you for sharing your wisdom, questions, and all the resources that we mentioned will be in the show notes. And thank you. We had people from Cameroon to Egypt and all over the place, Europe. So thank you everyone for joining us. Stay tuned for lots more episodes. And just as we started, 3 things: follow Juanita on LinkedIn. Her website will be launching soon. Follow PCDN, and any podcast that makes you think. Doesn't have to be this one. Just consider sharing and rating it. So thank you so much, Juanita, and everyone, and
Thank
have a
you. Thank you. Bye
good.
bye. You too. Ciao.
Okay, so we're done. Thank you so much. I'm sorry we went a few minutes over. We went about 15
Okay.
minutes over.
But
Um,
okay.
no, like
To make
it
me
was really good. And apologies for getting cut off. Usually it doesn't. I have no idea what happened, but it does
doesn't
happen.
matter.
Um,